Good evening, everyone. It is Thursday, December 8th. It is session 6. So we're 2/3 of the way through class at the end of the class today. It is 6:21 p.m. Central Time. Had a quick discussion, answered some questions off the books here before we get started on class. As we left off at the end of the day yesterday, we talked about that we're going to swap out the if-else statement for a switch statement in the caffeine solution. And then we're going to cover higher order functions today during class. And I'll lead us through one or two warm-up challenges. And then we'll then talk about FizzBuzz and kind of go through some of like the constituent building blocks that you'll need to solve the FizzBuzz challenge. And I'll put those out into the notes and then share the notes, and we'll do the prep together too. And we'll split up into groups of 2 or 3, depending on how many people are in class. Right now, we've got 8, and I know that Dave messaged me and he said he was having some problems getting connected, and so he's rebooting his computer. So depending on who shows up, we either do like 4 groups of 2 or 3 groups of 3. Has anyone in class solved FizzBuzz yet? If so, just drop me a note in the chat. Okay, so Noel has anyone else? Okay, so someone will get lucky and have Noel on their team. All right, so let's go ahead and jump back into where we left off last night, which was the caffeine control flow, right? And we did this as a big if statement, right? So if the day is equal to Monday, we know that the caffeine amount needed is 800. If it's Tuesday, it's going to, else if it's Tuesday, make it 600, else if it's Wednesday or Thursday. So remember the double pipes, right? So and whenever we see the double pipes, that means or, and we haven't had to deal with this a lot yet in many of our challenges, but it does come up quite a bit when you're writing algorithms, right? And so with either of those days, Wednesday or Thursday, we need 400 milligrams of caffeine, and the else, basically, which is Friday, is the last day that we would have to deal with. We could make this explicit for Friday if like people could put in other values, and maybe we'll take a look at addressing that. But for right now, this suits our needs. If it's Friday, we need 900 milligrams of caffeine. So let's go ahead and comment this out for right now. And we're going to replace that with a switch statement. So let's go ahead back to MDN. All right, so the switch statement evaluates an expression matching the expression's value against a series of case clauses and executes statements after the first case clause with a matching value until a break statement is encountered. The default clause of the switch statement will be jumped if no case matches the expression value. It will be jumped to, right? So if we have a case for oranges, we have a case for mangoes, and we have a case for papayas, and somebody puts in pineapple into our switch statement, it's going to fall through all of the options until it gets to the default statement, and it'll say, sorry, we are out of pineapples, right? So orange will get its own special answer, mangoes and papayas, and we can see mangoes and papayas are both charged at $2.79 a pound. And then so they get their own special answer. And this is called like a pass through or falling through the statement, where this is kind of like the or that we wrote in the other one. So We could say Wednesday or for the day of the week and not put anything there, and then do Thursday and then put everything we need to for both Wednesday and Thursday under the Thursday one. And it saves having to duplicate that code. So let's go ahead and first we'll take a look at just like a really basic switch statement, and we'll play with that. In fact, I'll pull this over. And we can do this in the notes. So we'll do. All right, and so notice how this isn't in a function. This is just as we change the name of this, we'll get different things here, right? And so what happens is, so like I put in papayas, doesn't hit the oranges case, basically doesn't hit the mangoes case, it does hit the papayas case. So we get mangoes and papayas are $2.79 a pound. All right, if I go ahead and I change this to chicken, right? So sorry, we're out of chicken, right? So we come down to this default statement. Now, there are like a couple of things to look at here, right? So with like the expression and the case statement. So let's go ahead and we'll just comment these out for right now. And here's our expression. And so let's say our expression is 3. We'll deal with numbers right now, right? And so we could say case 3. And then we'll go ahead and console.log 3. Sorry, buddy, you can't stand my lab. All right, so we'll just make it real simple. So when I run this, right, this is a 3. Now, if we say EXPR is greater than 2, right, as a case here, what do we think we're going to get when we run this? Is 3 greater than 2? Well, only one way to find out, right? So nothing happened here. Okay. And the reason being is, and why we were basically matching on something exact, is if EXPR is equal to 3 and I say console.log EXPR greater than 2, what am I going to send to the console right here? What's my answer going to be? Anyone want to take a stab? Yep, it's going to be true. All right, so remember, we see things like we see our variable names, we see the numbers, but the computer is going to go through and evaluate this, and what the computer is seeing is this. All right, and so now, does this match to this case? It doesn't, right? Like if we say true, right, if EXPR is true, right, now we're console.logging, now we're hitting it. So it's one of the things with a switch statement where it becomes more difficult to do like ranges or things that are fuzzy. Like it's looking for exact cases when we do it. And so that works really well in caffeine when we are giving it, like we're not giving it a range of days or like a range of numbers, or we're worried about floats or decimals. We're just saying if it is this M, like, and only this M, do this. right? So we can say here, switch, and we've got our switch, and then we've got to feed in our switch. So in this instance is XPR. And for us, it's going to be day, right? So that's what we're going to build our switch on, right? So day. And now we can say case M, right? And now steal this real quick. If we run this, so now shouldn't get anything for any of these guys. I'll probably get an error for them because I'm trying to divide. Right, I get not a number, but for this, we're actually getting the math that goes through here. Now we're console outlogging that caffeine needed. But if we were just console outlogging caffeine needed and not the divided by can size and the mass seal, like we would see that we get the 800, right? And so same thing here. Let's go ahead and do case Tuesday, right? Caffeine needed is 600. Case Wednesday, we don't need anything. Case Thursday, say caffeine needed 400, right? And so we want the, and let me just change this back to 150 on everything here real quick. I deleted something here. Keyboard went wonky there for a second. All right. Oh boy, I really blew this up. Don't need that there. How about? All right, so we're at 3 for all of these right now, and let's go ahead and do case F, and we need caffeine needed equals 900. Now let's go ahead and run this again. All right, and now we're getting 6 for all of them. All right, so when you are working with a case statement, we are running into an issue where basically it is evaluating to multiple things at the same time. And so if we were to return out of here, the last thing we ever do is return, right? So if we returned that, then like it will not continue to go forward. But because we have a this right here, right? Like, and we're not returning. So it actually just continues to go and go through the switch statement. And the way that we avoid that is by doing a break, right? So if I do this, right, so there we go. So now this one, we're good. And we put a break here. Right, so there's now all of these are working, and the same thing for here. We can put another break, and then because we didn't use Friday as default here, we can then say default just say return something other than was provided, right? And then same thing for here. Instead of console.logging it, we can return this. And then if we wrap this in a console.log, right? So there's all of our numbers, but if I do this, right, something other than Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday was provided, right? And so now we've replaced this else if statement with a switch statement. Any questions on what I did with the switch statement in conjunction with that? We're matching specific cases and we're not trying to do things like match logic like this. And I'm not saying that, like, if you have something like this, you want to put it back into an if statement. So any questions about the switch statement? Okay. All right, so switch statement, and then most likely not if it is asking you to do things like if it's above a certain number, do something, right? So if the sum of the cards in the hand is less than 15, right, you would want to do that with a if else statement instead of a switch statement. Yep, that's the way to go with that one. All right. All right. So higher order functions. And again, I'm going to cover this one. And it's a concept to be aware of, but this is another one where don't break your brain on higher order functions, right? Like you don't need this to get into Code Platoon. You'll get more experience with it in Code Platoon or any other bootcamp that you go to. And so it's a good to know, but it's not something that is going to like make your break get into like a coding camp somewhere. So a higher order function is a function that operate on other functions, either by taking them as arguments or by returning them, are called higher order functions, right? So like if we take a look at this here, this is a function, right? So, and this is a function. And then this is a higher order function. Okay. And so because what we're doing here is we're giving it a number and then a second number and we're adding them together. And when we call arithmetic, we're giving it a number, we're giving it a second number, and then this calc, notice how we use calc down here, is going to be basically a function call with the two numbers that we put in. So we could do something like add num1, num2. So this would be num1, num2 add, or it'd be num1, num2 multiply. And then that feeds down into your function. And we can do different types of math depending on what function we feed into our higher order function. All right. And so same thing here, right? Like we call arithmetic and we give it 2 and 3 and add. So this becomes 2, this becomes 3, this becomes add, this becomes add, this becomes 2, this becomes 3. We return the answer 5. So, and the reason that we do this is to reduce complexity of each function. Uh, it's just a way to keep our code organized and keep our functions as small as possible. There is, and this is like super bonus points for you here. But this is something that, and you don't even cover it too much in Code Platoon, but this is huge once you become a professional software developer, and it's called SOLID. And so the solid principles of coding, the solid principles of object-oriented programming, and it covers the single responsibility principle, open close principle, this called substitution principle, the interface segregation principle, and the dependency inversion principle. Ignore the OLID right now, but with this, so the solid or the single responsibility principle is that there should never be more than one reason for a class to change. In other words, every class should have only one responsibility. And what that breaks down into is that when we write a function, which is smaller than a class, and we haven't talked about classes yet, and you don't need it for the application, but your function should only ever do one thing, right? And so if we wrote, and I can show you this, in fact, just with the notes on here, right? So all this function does is add, all this function does is multiply, right? And then all of this function does is take in a means of doing arithmetic and the numbers, and then it does this one thing. It basically executes the type of math we're giving it and then returns the answer that's given from it, right? So this has a single responsibility, this has a single responsibility, this has a single responsibility. Is there a way for us to write this where instead of giving it the calculation, we could say, like create all of these, like we could say add, multiply all of this within one function? We could absolutely do that. But then if we were to look at something like the face of a scientific calculator or whatever, and we had to build out a separate function for each one of these operations, right? And we kept it all in one function, that one function would be huge. And then every time we need to find something to change it, like we have to dig through dozens or possibly hundreds of lines of code to find one thing, versus basically just knowing that I can search for the function name, like there it is, right? And I go straight to it. And so that's why we use higher order functions. We look at enforcing the single responsibility principle wherever we can. And that is pretty much it for session 6. And so we can take a look at just doing a quick example here with this, right? So we could say function do math, right? And I can say num1, num2 option, right? And then in here, I could say switch. Sorry, I need my curly braces. Right, and I could say switch 1, and we could return num1 plus num2. Right, and then, oh, I'm sorry. Switch is going to be option, and case 1 is going to be this. Go, so we could say case 2. Okay, and so that's it. And now I can do something like console.log, do math, and we can say 10 and 5 and option 1, right? Or case, so option 1, right? And so I would hope that I would get 15 from that. All right, so there's my 15. And if I change this to option 2, right, I should get 5. Oops, and that is multiply, right? So option 3 should give me 2. Right, and then option 4 should give me was it 50? And then if I do anything other than those, it's just going to return null. Right, like I just stubbed it out, so nothing. It returns something that's intentionally empty. Now, again, this is just a function, and these are very simple mathematical operations that aren't ever going to change, right? Like we're not going to change how we do addition, multiplication, subtraction. But if each one of these was its own individual piece of logic, like say something like where let's just say you run like an e-commerce website and you have to calculate sales tax depending on what state they're in, right? Or even down to municipalities, like Chicago has extra taxes. And so instead of just having this giant function that has like at least 50 different options in there, probably dozens more than that, right? Like we can break these out into their own little functions or their own little modules where we keep that code separate and we keep it nice and clean. And this is also very easy because like we're just adding 2 numbers. So I know that it's adding, but if we're doing something more complicated, it also gives us the option to basically do something with the name of our function to help us figure out what's going on, right? So I can say function add num1, num2, right? And we can return num1 plus num2. And that's all we have to do. And now instead of option, so we could still leave it option, but we can call calc here and we'll change, we'll just go ahead and comment this out. In fact, I will just leave it as option. It'll make more sense in the notes when we look back at it. All right, so now I can say something like return option num1, num2, right? And so now instead of giving it a 5, I can give it an add here and go ahead and run this. And notice I'm not doing it as a string because if I do that, we'll blow up. Right, type error, option is not a function. Right, and there's our 15. And now the same thing, we can copy this. Let's go ahead and do sub. Division. And we can do multiply. Right, and now I get the same thing. So if I just swap out sub down here, right, like now I should get 5. Right, and if I put div, right, there's my 2, and if I do multiply, There's my, no, I got 15 because I did not change the symbol. There we go. And there's my 50, right? And so now, instead of having everything crammed into one function, we have a very small higher order function that will draw on other functions, and we'll treat them as like little independent modules of code. And so the next step up from this is from a function is called a class. And like I said, we don't need to know anything about classes right now, but you'll need it once you move from functional programming like this, where we're just writing everything as a function, into object-oriented programming, where everything will be inside of different classes that talk to each other, which will be like, that is something you'll start to do like the 4th or 5th week of Code and Platoon, is you'll start to dive into object-oriented programming. And almost not all software, but the vast majority of software today is written as object-oriented software. All right. Any questions on what I did here? Is there extra talkative tonight? All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at a couple of smaller challenges here, and then we will then talk about FizzBuzz, and then I'll turn everyone loose on FizzBuzz for a while, and then we'll come back and I will go over the solution to FizzBuzz in front of the class. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at rivers here. So we've got a README of write a method that takes in a river velocity as an integer and a boat type as a string. Rowboats can only navigate in waters under 3 miles per hour, otherwise they'd crash. Similarly, sailboats can navigate under 7 miles per hour, and ships can navigate under 15 miles per hour. Return whether the input boat can navigate given the river velocity. Okay, that sounds good to me. Let me grab my little prep code block here. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look here. So for parameters, I'm going to have 2 params. Right, so I'm going to get a number, which is the velocity of the river, and a string, which is the type of boat, and be limited, or that is limited by a top speed. All right, so we're going to return a Boolean, either true or false that the boat can sustain that river speed. All right, example, we'll say C below. All right, let's take a look at the examples, right? So we've got rowboat, rowboat, sailboat, and then we've got SpongeBob's sailboat down here, and this should be true. So what is this telling us? Right, that we don't, it's case insensitive, right? We don't care. So we'll definitely want to tackle that and figure out what's going on with it. Now, I think looking at this off the top of my head, I can solve this with a switch statement, right? Like I will build a switch statement based on the boat type or param. Holy cow. Once I match the boat type to my case, I will then compare the given speed against the max speed and return true if the given speed, and what does it say up here? So can only navigate waters in under 3 miles per hour, right? So that's going to be less than 3 miles per hour. Similarly, sailboats can navigate under 7 and ships can navigate under 15, right? So we're going to return true if the given speed is less than, but not equal to the top speed provided for each boat, right? And so we know rowboat is going to be less than or equal to 3. And what was the middle one here? Two sailboats are less than 7, and then ships, right? So sailboats are less than or equal to 7, and then a ship is less than or equal to 15. Or I'm sorry, not less than or equal to. How about just less than? Apologize. All right. So to me, this looks like a pretty good start on my pseudocode. So let's go ahead and get started here. So first things first, because I'm already console out logging, I'll just return velocity. Let's run it. All right, there's my velocities. And how about boat type? Yep, there's my boat type. So we're all good. Now, what I will say here is that I need to build my switch statement. So I'm going to do switch. And I'm going to do boat type. Right. And now, how can I solve my boat type problem right up from the get-go? What built-in can I use here? Anyone want to take a shot at it? Not triple equals. So we're going to use a built-in method to get rid of any case sensitivity that we might have. All right, I can do 2 lowercase here. Right, and now it doesn't matter if I do sailboat or if I do ship. Right, like I'm going to take care of all of the case sensitivity here. All right, so now we're going to say case one, or the first case, I should say, is the string of rowboat. All right. And so if we hit rowboat, we are going to return true or false out of here. So we can put some logic here where we say, is the velocity less than 3 in this instance, right? And so for rowboat, if we run this now, we shouldn't get anything for these, right? And like we'll do a default case here again of turn no ship type not found. All right. And so we should get ship type not found for these three, but for this one, we should get a true and we should get a false. All right. So there's our true and there's our false. Because even though I'm returning velocity less than 3, again, this is the first time through, it's going to say 2 and it's going to change this to a 2 and then it's going to resolve to true, right? And then the second time, this is a 3 and then this is a 3 and then this is not true, so it resolves to false. We don't have to assign it to a different variable or do anything crazy with it. We're just going to give it some logic and return the value of that logic, which will be true or false. All right, so for our next case, we can do sailboat. And we can do something very similar here, and we'll say return velocity less than 7, right? And now our sailboat ones here, right? We get true for both of those. And then lastly, we have a case of ship, and that is return velocity less than 15. I believe that was the speed we were looking for, so there's that. And we'll go ahead and run it. And that's true. All right. And we're not doing anything crazy. So I mean, like technically we could say -1, right? Like we still get a true value. We're not solving for anything special like that at that point. Like we're just solving to exactly what they ask us to do. Now, this also can absolutely be done in an if else, right? So like we can comment this out, right? And say if boat type is triple equal to rowboat, and then return the exact same thing here. Right, or we could say else if right, and we can call it sailboat and oops, sorry. Yeah, and then return right. And now with this, I'm just going to do a quick boat type equals. So I'm assigning it a new value and I'm assigning it the same value. I think that should work for us. Let's see here. All right, so I get a true, a false, a true, a true, and a true. All right, so this whole thing, this does the exact same thing as this. And again, I'm exposing you to both ways of doing this, but if this makes sense to you and this doesn't, forget I ever said it, right? Like, you only need to know this to make it through the application. Like, there's nothing specific in there, I believe, that says like you have to solve this with a switch statement or anything like that. So if one is more confusing to you than the other, go with the one that's less confusing, right? And like the switch statements look a little cleaner, but because of like not being able to match against logic, and having to match against like something specific, like they can be more difficult to use, right? So kind of like when I showed this over here in the notes where the this blows up, like this isn't the case that we think we're getting, right? But if we did this in an if statement, it would work just fine. All right, any questions on the how we tackled the rivers? Okay, so let's see here. There is, so that's FizzBuzz, blackjack, detention. Okay, so blackjack is also pretty basic control flow. Yeah, I would say that a switch statement can be, so Chris asked, a switch statement requires more depth of understanding the tools to express a code. Yes and no. So like not always, but there's definitely some traps in a switch statement. So when in doubt, use like an if statement would be my suggestion. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at blackjack here. All right, so given a number representing the sum of cards in hand, write a method that returns a string that is the appropriate response in a game of blackjack, i.e. if the sum of the cards in the hand is less than 15, return hit. If the sum is between 15 and 21 inclusive, return stand. And if the sum is greater than 21, return bust. All right. Would you like me to lead through this one, or would you guys like to take a stab at this one on your own? With this being almost identical to what we just did with the rivers control flow. Any opinions? Okay. Would you like to have, say, 15 minutes to try this on your own, or do you want me to split everyone up into like groups? Okay. So it's 7:10. Let me drop this link in here. I'm not going to shove everyone out into breakout rooms. I'm going to grab a cup of water. My throat's pretty dry. But other than that, I'll be back. If you've got questions, feel free to ping me in the chat, but we'll go over it together at 7:25. And the link to the replets in the chat, but I'll be right back. All right, welcome back from taking a shot at doing the blackjack, which is more control flow, so more practice with if statements. Excuse me. And so we're going to go ahead and go through as a class again. So we'll go ahead and drop our prep stuff in here, and we will grab this. We will grab some examples. All right. Got another visitor this time. I've got Todd now. I had Todd. He's one of your cat crying in the background. He's been going nuts for like the last half hour. I don't know why. He's got food and he's got water. Should be a happy guy. All right. So we've got this set up. So for blackjack, we've got given a number representing the sum of the cards in hand, write a method that returns a string that is the appropriate response in a game of blackjack, i.e. if the sum of the cards in the hand is less than 15, return hit. If the sum is between 15 and 21 inclusive, return stand. And if the sum is greater than 21, return bust. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at our prep here. So we're going to get one parameter, which is a number representing the current total of my hand. And I'm going to return a string that has either hit, stand, or bust, depending on my input sum. Right, so example, see below, and pseudocode. All right, so make sure no one's behind me. So for this, I know that I'm going to need an if statement again. So this time, because we're going to be using some greater than or equal to logic, we're going to we won't want to use a switch statement for this. We're going to want to use an if else statement or else if statement. So if sum is greater than 21, right, we need to return bust. If sum is equal, less than or equal to 21, and greater, and sum is greater than or equal to 15, we will return what is that, stay or stand. And then lastly, if sum is less than 15, return hit. Okay. So this one, again, fairly similar to what we did in the rivers control flow. So first things first, I don't need to console log it. I'm just going to return sum, make sure that I'm getting my numbers passed through. All right, 5, 20, 23, we're good there. So we see that getting passed through. So first things first, if sum is greater than 21, we'll return bust, right? And so just with this, we should get nothing, nothing, and then bust. So we should see one bust up here, undefined, undefined, bust. That looks good to me. So next is else if, right? We could, if we wanted to, so we can be explicit, right? So we can say if sum is less than or equal to 21, or I'm sorry, and sum is greater than or equal to 15, right, we can return stand, right? So now we should get some stands in there, right? There's our stand. And then lastly, we can do And again, we could do an else if and be explicit here, but if it's not one of those, it's going to be this last one, right? And we're going to return hit. Right, and so there's that. Now, we could technically make this a little bit smaller because we're doing anything that would be over 21, we're already filtering out, right? So technically we don't need this because if we put in 23, 22, it's going to get filtered out right here in the top pass of our if statement and we'll bust. Now, if we have 21, 20, 19, 18, 17, 16, 15, we're going to stand, right? And then anything under 15, so 14 and lower, we're going to hit. And we could do right, so those should all be hits, right? If we change this to 14, it should stay a hit, right? As soon as we change it to 15, right, we move to stand, and then it doesn't matter if it's 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, and 21, these should all be stand. Come on, computer. There we go. So we actually, so this to me is interesting. So well, I'm sorry. So we've got 15. And then at 16, we've got hit. So that to me tells me that I did something wrong. This is wrong. This is wrong. This is wrong. And I'm not sure exactly why it's wrong. 1 second. Do this again. There we go. Okay. I think it gave me, like, it showed the same console again because the computer hiccuped. Like, I was about to panic because this logic is pretty straightforward. So these are all stands. And then if I were to change these to numbers, like, so we've already got 22, 50, right? Like now all of these should bust. Yeah, and they all bust. All right, so this to me looks pretty good. And like I said, this one fairly straightforward. Now I know people had, like, I saw some messages in there, people had some hard time. Like, if you don't mind sharing, like, where specifically did you struggle with that? Like, where, like, what did I do that where you're like, oh, aha, that's what I wasn't doing right?
Syntax is what's killing me.
Okay. Let's see here.
Same.
Okay, so go ahead.
I was say, when you guys mean syntax, you mean the terminologies of like using the function and setting up like return, else if, that type of stuff?
That's how I mean it.
Okay.
Yeah, so Kathy dropped her code in here. So let's pop this in here and let's kind of diagnose what was happening here. All right. So, and we're missing that. So I don't know if that was a copy paste miss or not, but so we'll want to put our closing thing in here. Let me go ahead and comment that out. All right. So this, you're on the right track, right? So like we've got this and we want to do comparison. So we just have to make sure that we're moving, like, basically like for our if statement, everything like that we're comparing needs to be in the parens, right? So we just need to wrap that all the way in the parens. And so the other thing, and we don't need a colon here, right? So now we're good there. So if sum is less than or equal to 15, and so this, we just want it to be less than 15, right? So if it's less than 15, so 14 and below, we hit. I think that's it, right? Yeah, because we want to stand on a 15. You also, so when you do an if statement, for one line if statements, technically you don't need curly braces, but I highly recommend that you always use curly braces, right? So just because, like, if it's more than one line where you're doing multiple things in your if statement, if you don't have curly braces, it will break. But like a one line won't. But again, I even if I'm writing one line, every single time I'm always using curly braces, right? And excuse me. So an empty if statement, right? So an empty function looks like this. Right? And so an empty if statement right, looks like that. So it looks similar to a function. And I mean, it's just a function that's already built into JavaScript that does like comparative logic for us automatically. So it needs to look like this every time, right? And if we do a else if, more logic here, and we do the same thing again. And then when we have an else statement, there's no logic, there's just this, right? It's like this is an empty if statement. So, and I'll drop this now, but also put an intro to coding. So if you're writing an if statement and you're not sure how to do it, right, like, or exactly how to structure it, you can always come back to this. You can copy this into your own notes, whatever. But this is like the basic structure for it, right? And so same thing here. And this is also, we can do this way. So like, we don't have to use else if statements. We can do everything as a if statement if we want to, right? So we don't need blackjack again, right? We just need sum. And we want to make sure that we're taking all of our logic in here and wrapping it. And then whenever we use an and or statement, we have to repeat what we're comparing against, right? So like, you can't just say like, is sum greater than or equal to 16 and less than or equal to 20. It's sum greater than or equal to 16 and sum greater than or less than or equal to 20. All right. And so this will actually be 21. And this is going to get dropped down to 15. And so we tab that in. We'll put our curly braces here again. Right. And again, no colons for a return. We just return. And then if we're returning a string, we just put out there what we want to return. And then the same thing for this last one down here. We can do the same thing. Right. So we could say if sum greater than 21, throw our curly braces in there, throw a return up in here, get rid of this colon. Can do that. let me hit this, should straighten us out. There we go. And so now we're doing the same thing, right? Like this is doing the same thing as this if else return. So we're doing the same thing here. So we should be able to, if we run this again, right? We get a hit, which is what we want. We get a stand, which is what we want, and we get a bust, which is what we want, right? So you had everything you needed. We just need to make sure that we put our things in the right place, right? And so does anyone else have like an example of code we want to take a look at and see what we can do to get it working? Yeah, if not, no worries. But does it make sense? Like I said, like we're doing this for repetition, and there's different ways to get it done. So like this is a legit answer, just like this is a legit answer. So I wouldn't do this in a switch statement this time, but there's multiple ways to solve these. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at FizzBuzz, right? And so I will do, let's see here, I'm gonna fork it. All right, let me grab for the prep code block here. All right, and let's grab this. I'm not going to grab all of this time. I'm only going to grab this. Oh, they've got the whole thing to 100 down here, right? Well, we'll grab it to 30 for right now. The comment is the command /, which is right underneath the question mark. And then to do a multi-line comment, there's no shortcut for it, but it's just / asterisk, and then to turn it back off as asterisk /. All right. So when we do FizzBuzz, right? The FizzBuzz test is an interview question designed to help filter out programming job candidates. The text of the programming assignment is follows, or something similar to this. Write a program that prints an object with a number of keys. And the key is the number, and the value is either the number, fizz, buzz, or fizz buzz. But for multiples of 3, assign the key's value to equal to fizz instead of the number. And for multiples of 5, assign the key's value to equal to buzz. For numbers which are multiples of both 3 and 5, assign the key's value equal to fizz buzz. Otherwise, assign the key's value to equal the number. Right. So what that's saying is that as we go through here, if we ran FizzBuzz 100, 1 is not evenly divisible by 1 or by 3 or 5, so we just assign it a 1. Right, same for 2. 3 is a fizz because 3 is evenly divisible by 3. Right, so if the values equal multiples of 3, right, is fizz, and then multiples of 5 is buzz. So 4 is 4, 5 is buzz, and then 6 again is a multiple of 3, so it's fizz. 7, 8, 9 is fizz, 10 is buzz, 11 is 11, 12 is fizz, 13 is 13, 14 is 14, and then 15 is fizz buzz, right? And then we just keep repeating up through however many times we tell it to. And you can see it repeat through here. And so to do that, I'm getting one parameter, which is a number. And I'm going to return an object. Come on, dude. Come here. All right, you gotta give me room though. All right, so okay. So first things first, I will need an object to store all of my KVP, so key value pairs, right? So how do I create an object? Anyone remember how to do that? Yep, so let we'll call it results and then equals, and how do we start off an object? Okay, so yeah, we see the curly braces. So that when we see the curly braces like that, that means that we're dealing with an object, right? So 1, 1, 2, 2, fizz, 3, right? And so like that's our base object, and we won't actually put anything in here, but that's what it'll look like, right? So there's my object to store all of my key value pairs. Right, and then when I need to do something over and over and over again, what do I need to do? What building block is that when I iterate? Yep.
While loop.
Yep, a while loop or a for loop, either one. I would say, again, I would say use a for loop. That's going to be the most common one and the one you should practice with the most. But you could write it with a while loop as well. So I will need a for loop to iterate through my count. All right. And so a for loop will look like this. So for let I equal 0, or I guess we can say I equal 1 because we're going to start counting at 1. I less than and I plus plus, and then our curly braces, right? And then so all of our logic. So all right, so I have 4 decisions to make, right? Like I'm going to create a key that is either going to be a number, the string fizz, the string buzz, or the string fizz buzz. What building block do I use to help make decisions?
If statement.
I'm sorry, what was that?
If statement.
Yep, an if statement, right? So I will need an if statement to figure out what the value of my key is, right? So, and an if statement is if logic in here, then that, right? And furthermore, I'm going to need, so I will need my if statement to make 3 unique decisions, right? So I will have to have if num equals something, I need fizz. All right, so and those are the 4 distinct paths that my function can take each time I loop through. Yes, so we need a formula, and the formula is basically I thought I brought it over. I didn't, so but basically if so here, let me do this up here. Right, so that's the formula, right, in plain English. And so that we need to figure out how that translates to this down here. Right. So so we've got this num. So next is each time I iterate through my loop, I will need to take my key value. I'm sorry. I am saying this backwards. So the key won't be fizzbuzz, the value will be fizzbuzz. right? So let me just read this. So my value in my KVP, my key in my KVP will always be the number in my current count. The number is a multiple of 15, value will be FizzBuzz, and so on and so forth, because the key has to be unique. So if we do 1 to 100, the keys will have to be 1 through 100. We'll need an if statement to figure out what the value is for each corresponding key. So if the num is this, all gets turned to value. All right. So each time I iterate through my loop, I will need to take my KVP and add it to my results object. So to do that, let's take a look at this. How do I add a new key value pair to my JS object? All right, so use the bracket notation. Let's take a look here. What's Bobby Had's got for us? So there are multiple ways to add a key value pair to an object. Use bracket notation, so object name equals a value, right? So use dot, so object dot name equals a value, and use the object assign method, passing in a target and a source objects as parameters. So I'm going to choose bracket notation here, right? And so if we've got an object with the just has the name Tom in there, and we can do object.age is 30 and object brackets country is Chile. After we console.log the object, so the object will contain all 3 of these keys. So let's go ahead and do that this way. All right, so if we come back here to FizzBuzz, so we can do, and we're going to call our object results, right? So we'll say results. And then this will be my key, right? And so basically we can say that this is going to be num is going to be my key, and then it's going to equal my, right? And so the value is going to change each time we iterate through. It's not going to be my value. I just don't want to give you too much of the answer there. All right. Now, once that is done, okay. So notice a lot of pseudocoding went into this one, right? Like I broke this down as much as I could without just writing the answer out. All right. Now I'm going to drop this into the chat here. Can someone let me know, are you able to fork my replit as well instead of the CP admin one?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So what I would say is everyone can fork my replit, and then I've got, I know Chris is in the room, but he's away from his keyboard for a little bit. He had a family thing to take care of. And I know, Nola, you said you already solved it. So let's see here. And that would give us, so I'm going to push everyone out into groups of 3. And Noel, I mean, feel free to help out where you can. Just don't like basically make your other teammates work for it. Don't just give them the answers, but feel free to help guide them through it. And I will check in on the other group. And no one else has solved it.
I found the information on Google and broke it out, but I hadn't done it with the object, which was the focus of the problem. So I didn't really solve it properly.
Okay, no problem. But it sounds like maybe you got the mechanics of it.
I got the mechanics of it, and I was very slow because where I didn't understand part of it, I'd go look it up, make sure I understood what the syntax meant, and so that I'm able to piece, and understand what I was typing instead of just, taking code off the web.
Yeah, okay, no problem. And no, I don't care if the keys are numbers or strings of numbers. Like I wouldn't sweat that part at this point. So let me go ahead and pause the recording. All right, welcome back from the breakout session to try and tackle FizzBuzz. We'll go ahead and go over everything in class together now. So we did the prep, and I shared that before we broke out into 2 different teams, and we've got some examples here. All right, so already did the prep. So let's go ahead and start off with what we need to. So first off, I need to write my function call. So we'll do console.log FizzBuzz, and I'm just going to start with counting to 30. Right, and so if I console.log num, I should hopefully see 30 over there. And I do. All right, excellent. So now that I'm going to 30, I know that we talked about I'm going to need to loop through here. Right, so I'm going to write a for loop. So I'm going to say for let I, and we get in the habit of saying let I equal 0 when we're going through an array, but when we're actually counting, like I don't need the number 0 in my return or in my results, so I can actually start counting at 1 here, right? And then however I do want to keep counting until I hit num. So we'll take a look at this and see if this gets me exactly what I want, or I might fall 1 short here doing it this way. So we'll do our opening curly brace, close curly brace. So that's one thing I saw with both the teams, like missing the curly braces. Pretty much in JavaScript, so every time you open up a function, you're going to need a curly brace. When you do a loop, you're going to need a curly brace. When you're doing different parts of if logic, you're going to need those curly braces, and that's where you use it to wrap your logic. All right, so let's go ahead and run this. Oh, and I get 30 because I'm just doing num instead of I. So let's go ahead and do I. All right, so 1 through 29. So we'll do this as less than or equal to num. And there's my 1 through 30. So I'm feeling pretty good about this part now. Right, and so now before I get crazy and figure out all my fizzes and buzzes and all that stuff, I know that I need an object. So I'm just going to say let result equal an empty object here. All right, and now instead of console.logging I, and I know that I'm going to be returning my object at the end of the day, so return results. Right, and so now instead of just console.logging I, let's go ahead and push I into my object. Right, and the way that we do that is by doing results I equals I, and now I should just have basically a bunch of key value pairs that are only numbers. Nope, I just have I as 30 again. What did I, oh, sorry, because I put that as that. There we go. I feel better about that one instead of making a string. So, and I know, Noel, you had talked about like, so this example down here just shows the numbers without the quotes. And this one is like the quote marks are on here. And when we look back at this is just all like somebody wrote this by hand and this is markdown, right? So these three backticks again, like we're looking at a markdown file. I looked this up. I was looking to see if we could push it in there without it, but if we do use number as key in object JS against what many think JavaScript objects cannot be a number, Boolean, null, or undefined type values, object keys can only be strings. And even though a developer can use other data types to set an object key, JavaScript automatically converts the key to a string value. All right. And so like we can create our own object and like we can put a number here and not put the string in it, but JavaScript is automatically behind the scenes converting it to a string for us. So I don't really care if we've got quotes up there or not. And then the wrong one here. So to me, this is no big deal. I think it's not an invalid solution at that point. All right, so now I need to, I'm really close, right? So I've got my loop built, I've got my object to hold all of my information built. I'm able to populate my object the correct amount of times. All my keys are already correct. So now I just need to start working on my values. Right. And so if I do, let's see here, we'll do some conditional logic here. So I say, if I is, let's see here. So I know we talked about multiples. And so the way that I would handle this, and I'm not sure if the other teams got to this or not, but this would be a great place to use the remainder, right? So I can say, we'll console.log this out here real quick, right? So if I say console.log 3, and again, it gets called modulo or modulus, but in JavaScript, it's a remainder 2, right? I get 1. But if I do 3 remainder 3, I get 0. So I can say if I remainder 3 triple equals 0, right? Then instead of results I equal I can do results I equals fizz, right? And then we can say else oops, help if I put that back. Excuse me. All right, so now we've got 1, 2 fizz, 4, 5 fizz. So it looks like we're fizzing on multiples of 3. So I feel pretty good about that. All right, and now the next step is just to do an else if statement. Right, so exact same pattern. So I can say else if I modulo or remainder 5 triple equals 0, results I equals buzz. Right, now we can clean this up here a little bit. The button, okay, we're looking good there. And so now if we run this again, there's my fizzes, there's my buzz on 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30. Right, now I've got one last thing to do here, and that is to do fizz buzz. Right, and so let's go ahead, let's continue our pattern. So, and we can do 3 and equals 0 and remainder 5 equals 0, but we can also basically look at multiples of 3 and 5 that equal 0 are going to be 15, 30, 45, and so on. So we can actually condense this logic down a little bit and get rid of that, and we can just say by 15. All right, and so now I can say results I equals fizzbuzz. All right, so here's the last part of it. Let's go ahead and run it. So 15 should say fizzbuzz, 30 should say fizzbuzz. Where did I screw up? We talked about this earlier tonight.
You gotta put fizzbuzz on top, like the 15, because the computer reads the 15 first and does that, correct?
Right. So you will stop, like your if statement can only give you one thing. And the first true condition that it meets, it will always take that condition. Right. So this is true, but it's also true for this as well, because 15 is a multiple of 3. So it comes in and it says I is 15, right? And then is 15 remainder 3 equals 0? Yes, it is. It hits fizz. It never looks at this one. It never looks at this one. It never looks at this one. It comes back to the top of the loop, and now it says I is 16, right? So the order that we put these in become very, very important. So let's go ahead and adjust our logic here a little bit. Did anyone run into this while they were writing it?
We did.
Okay. Yeah, that's like the common pitfall with fizzbuzz. I was wondering if someone was going to yell at me before I got to do my surprise. All right, so now we've flipped these around. So because now when we hit 3, like it's going to ignore this one because 3 remainder 15 is not 0, right? And so on and so forth, all the way until you get to that first 15. Right, so now 15's a fizz buzz, 3 still fizz, 5's buzz. Like this is looking pretty good to me. Right, so now we can take this all the way up to 100. Right, and so 90 should be fizz buzz, 75 should be fizz buzz, 60 should be fizz buzz, 45 should be fizz buzz, 15, 30. So that is the solution here. So I feel pretty good about this one. All right. Any questions, anything that you ran into that gave you a hard time while you were working on this? Can you explain why I less than num? Where would that be? Oh, so for this. So, well, it does, but I mean, technically it still works, right? But like if I put in 100 and I just have I less than num, I'm going to stop counting at 99. Right? So, I mean, like technically I could do like I minus I less than num minus 10, right? And now I'm going to stop counting at 89. So, but if the whole thing is that I want to count to 100, right? And like I said, a lot of times we start counting our loops at 0, like when we're going through arrays, we're not going through an array this time, right? So if I do that, I get a 0 here and I get fizzbuzz because basically 0 divided by 15 is 0. Any number divided by 0 is 0. Or 0 divided by any number is 0. And so like, but we don't have that in our example either. So we don't want to start counting. Like technically I could start counting at 10 if I want to. right? And so I start at 10. And so we want to, like, and again, it's free to run it, so it doesn't bug me. Like oftentimes I'll just put in my default numbers, or maybe I'll forget, and I'll run it and I'll see what I get the first time around, and then I'll adjust from there, right? So there's no point in having to try and memorize everything, right? Because I'll get there eventually, right? So now I know I want to start from 1. I'm saying less than num. I see that stops me at 99. So I say less than or equal to num. Right. And now it's counting to 100. Right. And so, and then this to me is a good, correct answer. All right. So any other questions here on FizzBuzz, or like anything that, like, while I was doing it, like it confused you, or why did I do it this way, or why did I do it that way, or why is something like this? And feel free to throw it out there. We've got, I mean, 8 minutes left. I'll answer any other questions we have about this, and then I'll kind of talk about what we're going to get into on Monday. Okay. So on Monday, we've got truthy falsy, and recursion. So we're gonna get into recursion on Monday. That is going to be a brain melter. We're gonna look at coding a little bit different than the way we currently look at it. And I mean, I double checked with Guillermo. There's no reason that you'll need to use recursion on the application process. It's more, again, like we're just getting you exposure to the concepts. And then we can look into, there's a handful of problems here. These ones that say recursion at the end are all recursive solutions. And so we can kind of play around with that a little bit. So on Monday, we'll probably do like one recursive problem, and I'll lead that. And then the rest of the time, we'll take a look at doing, let's see here, we'll probably hit detention. We can hit camel case is a good one. I don't, well, actually high score might be a good one because that's looping. 2 strikes is a good one. So like those will be our candidates probably on Monday. On Wednesday, we will have, like, we can hit some of the weirder ones. So like we can come back and take a look at hot potato, and then we can look at hungry hippos. Maybe we can look at prime numbers, and we'll do at least one more recursion problem. And then on next Thursday session, and also on Wednesday, Greg Drobny will be there for the first half hour, 45 minutes of class, depending on how many questions people have. And then next Thursday will be the last night. There's no slides for next Thursday. We'll hit any other outstanding challenges that people want to cover that maybe I skipped over, but we'll also definitely be doing employee data, which again is probably the hardest. I mean, it's the last one on the sheet. Like this is the hardest one. And then we'll get any of the other more difficult ones that we weren't able to get in class earlier. Any recursion ones we want to do. And then we can also talk about any other topics that you want to. And probably not Monday of next week, but usually the last 2 days of class, instead of doing it in Replit, I'm actually going to drive the code in VS Code so you can see what it looks like inside of like a real development environment. And feel free to stay with Replit as long as you're comfortable with it. But the sooner you can migrate off of Replit and the VS and to VS Code, and I highly recommend VS Code over Atom or any of the other IDEs out there, because if you do end up going to Code Platoon, and I'm guessing a whole bunch of other boot camps, you're going to learn in VS Code. And so the more familiar you get with it, the quicker you get familiar with it, the better off you're going to be if you do decide to go into a boot camp. I mean, like I said, I know one person that uses Atom on my project, and I know one person that uses like some JetBrains, like high-end, like pay for IDEs, and then like the other 25, 30 developers that we have all use VS Code. So it's really, really common, especially if you're developing web applications. All right. So it's 8:57. I'm going to stop the recording.